Okay, can everyone hear me? So let's start. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you and with these three colleagues here on stage, these three very powerful roles. We have Almarcegui, artist from Zaragoza, if I'm not mistaken. So I will address her in Spanish. And she will be able to explain her work better, but she talks about opportunities, spaces in cities, and the use of resources in order to produce our cities. And she has had exhibits in Venice, Amsterdam, Paris. So I recommend that you find her on the internet. Curro Claret is an industrial designer. And maybe I'm overdoing it, but I could say he's one of the only designers I'm interested in, because his design can add these critical analysis of the topics he wants to solve. So, well, I may be inventing what I'm saying. If you're shy, you can say you had no idea about what I'm saying. But what he does is that between design and, well, he introduces art to make problems of consumer society visible. And I guess you know his work, you've seen it everywhere, and when we finish, I will ask him whether the name of his work, T300, is at all related to Terminator. Lionel Billiet comes from Brussels. He's bioengineer. He's part of the Rotor collective, and I recommend that you check it out. Rotor has two parts. One is the design side of things. They carry out architectural, landscaping, urban planning projects from the point of view of reuse and recycling, but then they have a spin-off, which is Rotor DC, the construction company, which is the part devoted to deconstructing, is the sound right? The deconstructing of buildings, and they use the term urban mining. They dismantle components and then they make them used again so they can be reused. So we're very happy to have you here, and I will ask you for a round of applause for them. Well, and if we have to talk about circular cities, for many years now we've known that in nature the idea of waste does not exist. Waste comes from the linear economy, and we know that the political representatives know this, because this is in the media. So maybe one of the first things that we could do, because we want to be very propositive today, is to ask that the name of the General Management of Waste is changed. I don't know why they're not called General Management of Resources. And to that effect, the report of the Catalan government of municipal waste, what we put in the bin, the report of 2021 tells us that in Catalonia, a total of 4.4 million tons of waste were collected. Out of those 4.4 million, 400 tons, 10%, is, for example, the organic fraction. And organic means that if everything has gone well, it goes straight to compost. So 400 tons of compost have been produced, which is a resource, a pure resource, to improve the productive quality of the soil. And it is so very valuable in the fight against climate change, because compost improves CO2 emissions. So we know, based on a paper, on an article in La Vanguardia newspaper, I saw it a couple of days ago, we know that the Town Council of Barcelona in the past few years has been improving the waste sorting, door-to-door collection, individual carts for the green collection points. And this article said that maybe one of the pending issues is the repair and exchange. And I would like to ask this question first to Curro. Curro, you have a professional activity which is directly linked to this. So what is your personal experience with this? Well, good evening. Thank you very much for having invited me, and I would like to thank everyone who makes this possible. And I'm very happy to be sharing this panel with people that I admire. And we know that we need to do things differently. very differently. And when you introduced these figures, which sound a bit abstract sometimes, but actually they speak of the fact that we need to live differently. And well, what touches upon my work more directly and the aspects that are related to the reuse of materials, specifically wood. When you earlier talked about this piece that I made, the T300, well, I think we've been working on this for many years, and maybe we start to see the drift and how it is in the end a mix, not just the interest in managing our materials differently, but also this opportunity that when we work with organizations, associations, the Foundation Arrels, well, we get to connect groups and collectives which are on the fringes, and we can try and find shared moments with the rest of citizens. And these terms that you were using, repair, yes, I must say that, well, I knew you were going to ask this question, I knew it in advance, but it's still difficult for me. I can't quite find an answer, because I believe that for me, well, what helps me is trying to understand this idea of transformation. And when, for example, the geometry is used, the circle, the cycle of things, and the transformation, meaning that at some point, due to certain circumstances, something takes on a different role, and then we don't know what would happen with it, but then it will take another role. And this idea of transformation helps us in our mini task. It helps us because when we use these resources, we try to be aware of the fact that in our case we will use them to produce furniture, but with the awareness that we should manipulate the materials thinking that they will have a different use in the future. So we need to be careful when using them so that this transition can be very natural. And well, I'm kind of avoiding your question. The town council is generating these spaces to promote repair and to promote this attitude in people so that people get hands on repairing things. And there's a lot to do in that department, yes. And well, I'm sorry that I'm avoiding your question. I don't know what else to add. Okay, thank you. Curro, yeah, we got to know each other a bit, and I asked him in advance, and yeah, he told me that when they were looking, for example, for the wood, for the reused chairs, well, they found out that they could not collect these materials that were around bins. Yes, we went at night with groups and we collected the materials, and at some point they told us that we couldn't do that. Technically speaking, you can pick it up before it touches the floor. So if someone is discarding something, if you grab it before it touches the floor, then it's okay. But if it touches the floor, then it belongs to the company that has the concession and that manages waste. So then the town council helped us. They gave us permits to go to the green collection points, and there's been a big effort, and we've seen that. We appreciate that. But still, you cannot but think about this sophistication or this bureaucracy around, well, in this society we live in here and elsewhere as well. I mean, we've conducted workshops in other countries, and in Austria, for example, and you need to fill out forms and you need to go through protocols, etc. And in the end, this has an impact on our activities, of course, because it limits greatly not only our capacity to make and do, but also the awareness, this understanding of where things come from, and the value of going through the city and the weight of going through the city with a piece of wood on your back. So it has many more implications than just the red tape. But, well, I think you will talk about this later. But right now, it is a strange feeling because we're not reacting adequately, and this happens to us. And I'm sure there are many groups here who work on or with this will and who encountered the same situation. They have to go through all of the paperwork. In this session now, we will have Q&A sections, and we will do Q&As after each small presentation. So if anyone wants to contribute anything, if you know the regulation about how you can collect a product or another, and if you would like to enlighten us, I work with the public administration, and I know that it's very difficult to promote new policies. It's very difficult to promote new regulations, and it's very difficult to do so and to convey it to the citizens. So if any of you has more updated knowledge than us, we would appreciate it if you could let us know. So we will open a small Q&A, if that's okay with you. We have a roving microphone around, so if anyone wants to say anything. Okay, well, it always starts out like this, but I'm sure it will get better. Oh, yes, someone wants to speak. Okay, great. Well, the other day, a couple of weeks ago, there were some sessions called Regenerate Barcelona, Let's Regenerate Barcelona. Santiago Cirujeta was there, and he said, he talked about circularity and how they're working on it, and it seems there is a new law, a new circular economy law that gives a bonus or a subsidy for companies. There's a tax exemption for companies that use materials that are not perfect, that have some imperfections, and well, who sell also companies that sell these materials at a lower cost. It's the new law of circular economy. Is it a statewide law? Yes, it is. So it is applied year by year, and they're quite behind, but by 2025 people will need to do waste sorting. We're already doing that, but it will be compulsory by 2025, and now this year they're already giving tax exemptions to companies. Okay, thank you very much for letting us know. Let's continue with the concept of waste. 4 million tons of municipal waste, that does not include the waste coming from construction work. And in 2020, 5.7 million tons were produced, much less than in 2006 in the midst of the construction boom. 11 million tons were produced then, and I don't know if you know about the size of that. And well, you have a project, Lara, to visualize these projects. Maybe you would like to help us have a more precise idea of what this waste involves, the waste from construction work. Sorry, the question again? In Catalonia, 5.7 million tons were produced of waste from construction, and this is a dimension that is very difficult to get an idea of that volume. So bearing in mind your experience in making these projects visible, for example, the one in Venice, etc., where you've shown the amount of resources needed to build a building or the amount of waste that this produces, well, I just wanted to invite you to give us a reflection about this. Okay, about the volume of resources, yes, I've checked some figures. I remember one that was not my work, but before the real estate crisis in 2008, it was 2006, and it was the consumption of concrete per inhabitant in Spain, which was more than 1 cubic meter per inhabitant per year. That was the amount of concrete used per inhabitant. I mean to say that the amount of waste generated has a lot to do with the amount of resources used, the amount of material extracted, the amount of extraction. And actually they go hand in hand. The more you build, the more waste, and the more you have to extract as well. And we're talking about geological resources that are limited. They do not regenerate. So I believe that whenever we talk about reusing resources, it means that we are also feeding extraction because they're connected. This is why we talk about a cycle. These are the figures that I've encountered. And regarding your question, yes, a small building, I always try to work with the smaller buildings that I found because the amounts are huge. But if, well, a small building, a home amounts to 300 cubic meters very easily, even if in a very small building. So it's a huge amount. We also went through quarries. We checked quarries in Basel in Switzerland, and the amount of extraction of gravel to produce concrete was, well, there are 10 active quarries in the city. Some extract 1,000, 5,000, 6,000 tons per day, about 20,000 tons per day in quite a rich city of Switzerland, as an example. Basel. I think you said 400 tons of compost. That was per day? That was in a year. That's a very small amount compared to the total amount of waste and construction materials, both coming from demolitions and new construction. What I mean to say is that the scale of construction is a monstrosity. It's huge. You only need to look around to realize that. Well, for those of you who don't know her work, she has these installations where when there's a demolition of a building, what she does is she places all of the resulting material of this demolition in, I don't know if you crush it in a selective manner, or, and there's like a mountain of waste coming from the building, and this mountain has almost the same volume as the original building, which is quite striking. Yes, exactly. It is the waste mountain where we show the amount of waste coming from a building. It has been a very hated installation. They've called us megalomaniacs, but that's what comes out of a building. That's what the way it is. It's big. The amount of resources is huge. The amount of ruin or debris is huge, or rubble. And I work with demolition companies. They are the ones that demolish, and then they give us the rubble that comes out of their day-to-day work. There are hundreds of thousands of demolitions on a daily basis in a country. Hundreds of thousands, yes, just to say a number. But there are also lots of quarries operating. Well, and the person who knows about the number of demolitions, I think, is Lionel from Rotor. So let's continue with talking about rubble from construction work. I think professionally, right now. We had agreed that I would address Lionel in English. I don't know if all of you have headsets, if you need them, if you don't understand English. Is it okay that I address him in English? Yes?
I believe that the question of the demolition of the buildings is kind of sensitive, probably since Lacaton and Vassal published the book Plus 15 years ago. Now the architects are like more sensitive to the question of demolition. It's true that we don't speak so much about the exceptions. For instance, when the buildings are built on the very natural places like beaches or everything. Probably you don't know because you're not from Spain, a project called Life Pletera. Life Pletera, it's a project in La Platja de l'Estartit in Girona, where there was a urban plan that was next to the beach. And thanks to the European funds, they removed all the concrete and the asphalt to recover like the natural spaces in order to recover the natural services that it's providing. Si algú no ho coneix, el projecte Life Proletera.
If you don't know this project, I think it's quite interesting, the things that have been done in Catalonia in terms of recovering natural spaces.
Kind of exceptions, could you help us to think in a kind of like procedure or something about when do we have to demolish? Do we have to demolish? What do you think about the Lacaton and Basal statement, never demolish?
Okay, yeah, thank you for this question. I would say that this question of demolishing or not is often very context-based. So of course there are situations where demolition is the right answer. You were talking about a project where it's about recovering an ecosystem. I can understand that in such a situation it's indeed the right solution. But in general, well, if I speak about the context I know the best, which is the context of the city and the region of Brussels, it's a city where if you look at the buildings being demolished today, surprisingly, the buildings that we demolish are mostly relatively young. So instead of demolishing old buildings, the buildings that are the most endangered of demolitions are the young ones, like from the 80s or 90s. And the typology that is the most, the large buildings being demolished today in Brussels are office buildings. And it's maybe specific to the city itself, because there was a huge increase in office surfaces in the 60s, 70s in Brussels. There is even a term called Brusselization, which means like a kind of wild, uncontrolled real estate development. And all these buildings theoretically could be upgraded or converted, but we see that demolition is often an option that is chosen for reasons that has actually nothing to do with technical state of the building, but it's rather like, well, actually, in some situations, the developer prefers to demolish and rebuild exactly the same building because it's cheaper, or because they can adapt the aspect of the building, or they want another ceiling height. I think the ceiling is too low, or sometimes too high, and then the demolition begin again. So there is something like abusive demolition or early demolition of large-scale buildings, and it's something that most people know in an intuitive way in Brussels, but we don't have hard numbers. I mean, we have numbers like the one you mentioned. These 5.7 million tons for the region of Catalonia. For the Brussels region, which is smaller, it's 1 million ton per year. But this abstract figure doesn't tell you where these waste come from. Like, I've never seen a list of the top 10 building commissioners who produced the most building waste in the last 20 years or something. In theory, we could do it, and because of our work, I mean, with Rotor, we were often invited to intervene in buildings just before the start of transformation or demolition, mainly in order to reclaim some reusable materials, like for the second-hand market. Very often it's a small share of a building that we're able to reclaim by this way. So we're like often a kind of very small player intervening in large buildings. But because of this role, we've seen a lot of things. We've been there. I mean, we had a kind of privileged place in the Brussels building sector, because we've seen all these buildings just before they get transformed or demolished, and that's something that we would like to be able to. Well, I think that the numbers we mentioned, like these 1 million tons of waste, could be already drastically lowered if demolition was restricted to the situations where it's effectively needed, simply.
And do you think there is any way to restrict that? Can we restrict the demolitions of the city? Podem reduir?
Can we reduce the number of demolitions? Can we control the number of demolitions in private buildings?
Yeah, I believe we can do something like this. There are soft ways to do this. You can, for instance, encourage innovative or interesting ways to reconvert existing buildings. You can create a culture, an architectural culture that cherish the buildings we already have. So there's a lot to do on a purely cultural level. And on the other side, let's say that in the legislation or in the way building permits are given, you can also easily include these aspects. Like in Brussels the last years, the developers know that if they go for a full demolition and reconstruction, well, they could get their permit refused, or it could last a lot longer before they get their permit. And so it begins to slowly switch. What's special with this decision is that very often the decision of demolishing a building of 40,000 square meters is taken very early in the process by a very small group of people. Sometimes they don't even have an architect yet, but just, I don't know, the developer, they look at two Excel tables and then they take this decision. So every small change in the economic balance or in the delay for a permit or in the chance to get a permit can have huge impact in terms of waste.
When you talk about the chance of having a permit, quan parles de la possibilitat de tenir una llicència,
when you talk about this opportunity to get a permit,
like, I mean, there's any kind of specific article at your urban laws that help you or to forbid about demolishing an existing building, a new or whatever. For instance, the demolition of buildings which are not at least whatever years old or qualities or whatever. Do you have any kind of criteria to do that? Or it's like another system?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, historically, it's mainly, I mean, in the last decades, it was usually the cultural or historic argument that was used to preserve some buildings. But we saw in the last years that the environmental one begins to wait as well. So for every large development, the building commissioner needs to show that the impact on the surroundings is limited, and this idea of impact on the surrounding has kind of, well, the way it's interpreted today is broader than before. So it's like the impact on the environment. So you can use arguments like, well, if you demolish, you are wasting a lot of resource. You'll need a lot of fresh materials to build it, and it's also a lot of trucks that will need to go through the city center, etc. So actually, you can build an argumentation around this impact on the surroundings.
And who evaluates the impact of this demolition?
So the study needs to be performed by the one introducing the permit.
Yes.
And the study is assessed by the people who are delivering the permit.
So there is a kind of expert commission in the city council that decides if the demolition is right or not in a kind of way.
Well, they mainly look at other aspects, but that's one of the aspects that sometimes come into play. Yeah.
That's quite interesting. I don't know if you want to explain something else. If not, I'm going to open a debate to the public.
Yeah, please.
No sé què trobeu d'aquesta idea
What do you think about this idea that he mentioned, creating a commission for this, if I understood correctly, that assesses the projects from the environmental point of view, and therefore it's the criteria of an expert committee, not only based on objective criteria, as happens in Spanish cities, volume, height. No, they decide based on whether there are environmental conditions, whether it's adequate for demolition or not. So I wanted to open the debate a bit. What do you think about incorporating these types of committees, commissions, assessment committees that he mentioned? Lara. Yes, I wanted to say something. Your conversation, in my experience, I've visited many buildings that have been demolished in many countries, and in my experience, the fact that determines that a building is going to be demolished or not is not only about the heritage. You need to look at the ownership of the land, the building, so the ownership, and the price. There should be a difference in price between the price of the building and the price of the land. This is what in the end leads to demolition. But who decides the price of the land, the plot of land? It depends on the master plan. If a building has a height and a plot of land, but they allow them to build, if the building is one floor, but they will allow them to build 7 floors, well, the one who gives the permit to build 7 floors is actually the one deciding. It's a financial matter in the end. Yes, of course. And I think what he was saying is that there may be a condition in which you do not have the absolute right to demolish that building. You need to ask for a permit, and there is a committee that will say, okay, we consider that this demolition is not adequate. I don't know exactly what the criteria of this expert committee and expert uses in Brussels, but for example, in the case of a building, if it's just 1 floor and you can potentially build 7 floors, then it may be complicated. But in a building that is already 6 or 7 floors high, well, maybe with this concept, with this argument of reducing the amount of rubble, maybe the permit will be denied because of the negative environmental impact. I wanted to open this up to the audience. What do you think about this? Anyone wants to have a say? What do you think about the fact that there may be an expert committee in a town council that can say no, that can deny the permit to demolish a building based on environmental arguments? Beautiful question, Carlos. Beautiful. A few years ago, Europe started with an idea which was nearly zero energy building, and it referred to buildings. So they wanted to go for buildings next to zero consumption. Nearly was the trick here, because each country decided what nearly meant. Many countries decided that it was insufficient, and they went for nearly zero impact buildings and ZIP. And this means that the way in which we conceive a building, well, we've broken a cycle now, a cycle that has lasted for 150 to 100 years, in which all of the building systems were reversible. So it means we could set up and dismantle easily, and we could reuse almost everything that we used, almost 100% in the past. The second principle of thermodynamics is a must. Everything tends to chaos, but if the building systems that we use are non-reversible, and the clearest case is concrete, well, we are cheating at ourselves at solitaire from the very beginning. Let's stop fooling ourselves, and let's go for not an expert committee that assesses whether a building will be demolished or not. No, let's go for zero impact or nearly zero impact. And what does that mean? Like Zlatan Basal said, never demolish. That's the way it is. There is no middle ground. Otherwise, we're fooling ourselves. Oh no, just a little bit of concrete here and there. We're fooling ourselves. That should not be. That cannot be. Okay, anyone else wants to say anything along those lines or around this subject? We have not warmed up enough. Okay, go ahead, yes.
question in English also.
Of course not.
I think it's okay for one person on the panel at least. So you talked about a cultural shift amongst the architectural community or amongst architects, at least in Brussels or in Belgium or more broadly. And my question is just, do you see such a shift happening? So do you see architects more and more hesitant to take on commissions where there is a heavier impact or where there is demolition involved? And so is that soft approach that you're talking about, is it working? Can you see a hard impact from that soft approach that you were mentioning?
Okay. Maybe first of all, I would like to precise that I don't think Brussels does better than other cities. I'm talking about Brussels because I know it, but that's it. And yes, personally, I believe that this kind of a small cultural or mentality shifts has a large impact on the way we relate to materiality. Like, I think that that's maybe a common point in our work of the three panelists tonight, is that there's an effort to make these questions of materiality concrete or real, and not just abstract. Like, a building is not just a 3D model that gets magically transformed into reality. It has cost a lot of natural resource, and the reverse is true. You produce waste when you demolish. And well, I know a lot of architects who has developed a real sensitivity to this topic, and they also translate this into new forms of architecture or surprising aesthetical forms that are also inspiring. I mean, a project like take the Sala Beckett Theater in Barcelona by Flores and Prat. It's one case where the choice of working with reclaimed materials in an interior leads to not only a very surprising result and a completely new type of aesthetics, but also to a new process. The way they had to rely heavily on drawings, like drawings with the hand, in order to compose these interior based on existing ingredients. It's just super interesting, all the implications that something like this has. And I think a project like this one is also, it has also the potential of inspiring other ones. Well, from Brussels, we are very, very admirative of this type of projects, yeah.
Bueno, moltes gràcies. Algú més?
Thank you very much. Anyone else? There's someone there. I think that person was first. Hello? Related to the permits and licenses that you were talking about. Well, here we have on the one side demolition and on the other side construction permit. I've worked on this for a while, and I think the process is not consistent at all. Demolitions is a document that you fill out almost automatically. No one pays attention to it, no one reviews it, and I don't understand that. I don't understand why that is that way. It's just a check. It's, yes, okay, a tick. Everything is complete, the documentation is there, go ahead. And they don't really look at the volume of waste, of rubble, and they do not link this to the future construction. So if these two licenses take two different paths, it would be very simple to connect the two of them to see if the project makes sense. And the administration, well, my personal experience is minimal, but I've seen that the administration only concerns themselves with the fact that there is no empty plot of land for a while because it does not look good, but they don't concern themselves with the implications of that demolition. They just worry that a plot of land is not empty for a certain period of time because that is not good. for optics, but they don't worry about what happens beyond that demolition or after that demolition. So maybe it would be a way to approach it differently from the inside, from within, looking into the waste produced by construction. Thank you very much. There was another question at the back. And later we will continue. Don't worry, yes. Don't worry, there's a lot more to say. Hello again. I wanted to tell you about a specific case where there was a dialogue with the town council. It is a case in the Poblenou district of industrial warehouses. They did not want to demolish them. They wanted to preserve the heritage. They were affected by a plan, and one of them was about to be demolished, and a justification was requested. We talked to the town council, and these factories were preserved. So we've shown the value of not demolishing, and this is something that the team of architects has worked on. And well, there is a dialogue with the town council, and there is a new way of doing urban planning, and I think the 22-at district, this more sustainable and inclusive 22-at district, is showing this. There are now, well, we start to see new ways of changing the administration. Perfect, thank you very much. We'll continue talking to our speakers. One of the topics that is underlying here in the circular economy is the use of resources. We talked about this with Lara before. One of the big problems that we have in the capitalist system and the deregulated system that we have is that, generally speaking, we don't know where the resources come from. Oftentimes, we're not only using local resources, we are using resources that come from far away, and we don't know the impacts, the environmental impact they may have in terms of extraction, deforestation, pollution of rivers, etc., and even the impacts on people. So much so that last week, in September, the European Commission approved a draft directive to prohibit the consumption of products in Europe that had led to labor exploitation in any of their production stages. This is something that we knew happened. We knew we consumed products that came from exploitation. And if the idea is to reduce the consumption of natural resources, I wanted to ask the three speakers, could you give us some proposals? Do you have any ideas of things that you think could be done both at an individual level or at a collective level, or any other ideas, so that this is the beginning of a conversation, and so that ideas can come out of this panel that could then be conveyed to the administration? In any order? Yes, don't all try to be the first one to speak. Lara, would you like to start, or maybe Curro? I'm thinking. What could we do individually and collectively? What can we do? Well, first we need to understand what's going on. I think that's always good. It's good to know how things work, how extraction works. Who owns the resources? The word resources, it's essential to use the word resources. I did not realize how important it is, because if you talk about resources, it means it's something to exploit, to use for construction. And it's something you will extract. It doesn't matter if it has taken 300 million years to be produced. It's a material that is there for us to be extracted and used. And why do we have the right to use it? I think in Ecuador, a friend just told me they passed the first law that gives rights to geology. Not only animals and human beings, but geology also has rights. So it's good to question who owns what, who has a right to what, and understanding it as much as possible so as to start doing things. And then at an individual levels, I think the weight has been placed a lot on the consumer. Maybe you could specify a bit more. What do you mean by rights? Well, mean about mineral rights, yes, it is related to something that I'm working on. I've been working on for the past 7 years, mining rights or mineral rights, which is the ownership of underground resources. Geology is owned by governments, and they give it to mining companies as a concession. Mining companies prospect and then extract, and I think that's something we need to question. This is what is being questioned in Ecuador, and there you're almost considered an idiot if you don't consider that. So, and what I am doing now is that I am acquiring mineral rights of iron mines wherever they let me. I managed it for the first time in Norway and Austria and Sweden. I have mineral rights for iron sites, and since I have them, they are protected because they're exclusive. Mineral rights are exclusive. Since I have them and I'm not going to extract, there is no mining company that can have them. These are concessions of iron. I also had some rights for the lava volcano. Yeah, it sounds funny, but I have this right. And it's a huge deal, legally speaking, because I have exploration rights or prospecting rights, which is the first step before extraction. So I have the right to explore the geology, but also the obligation to explore it. I'm doing this individually and as an artist. And then I show the system of ownership of mineral ore, which is largely unknown. I didn't know it, and I was very impressed when I got to know it. Another example, just for you to understand what I'm talking about. It's a big one, but for example, in Rotterdam, where I live, in the Netherlands for 20 years now, when I started with this project, I realized that Shell, the company Shell, owns the mining rights of the city. We live in a city, and we don't know who owns the mineral rights of the gas under the city. With this project, I protect mineral rights, and I get people to find out about this. When people talk about mining, it means extraction is already happening, but normally we don't talk about where it comes from, and that's where it starts, when a concession is granted. Interesting. I don't know what you think, but next time I will introduce you as artist / inactive miner. Yes, I have a problem. And the nice thing about mineral rights is that they go all the way to the center of the earth. Okay. I don't know if anyone else would like to continue with this. After, well, hearing about mineral rights, the bar is quite high. It's difficult now to continue. Lionel, Curro, would you like to continue after this?
But Lara, I'm curious about, well, at Rotor we don't feel 100% comfortable with the widespread expression of urban mining when it comes to circular economy or reclaiming materials, because there is mining in it. I was wondering what was your opinion about that, about urban mining?
With urban mining, you mean the new trend in mining of extracting mineral from waste?
Well, some people use it. There's a broad definition, but usually it's the idea that you can get the materials needed from construction, from demolition sites. So it applies for reuse or recycling, but we hear it quite often, like urban mining as a kind of project for the building sector.
I've just used it for you a minute ago.
Yeah, I mean, it has the problematic of the circular economy, that in a way it encourages, quiero decir que tiene la problemática del concepto de economía circular.
Yes, it has the problem of the concept of circular economy because it encourages reuse of the waste, but when encouraging reusing waste, it also encourages producing. It encourages production at the same time. It's complex. The problem in my position as an artist is that artists bring problems to light, not solutions. I know what I said is very scary, but it's the way it is. You talked about demolition. earlier. And yes, architects no longer want to demolish. The matter is not who wants to demolish, it's who wants to build. And it's so linked to one another. Demolition and construction is linked. If you do not want to demolish, we cannot build. And who wouldn't want to build? So I'm sorry to say this. I'm sorry to create this problem, but it is a problem.
I'm not sure I agree. I think that there is, you can build stuff even if you don't pour a fresh cement concrete structure. Refurbishing is also building, or transforming a place, or yeah, I think you don't need tons of fresh materials to call yourself an architect, but yeah.
Yeah. Curro, dinos qué piensas tú.
What do you think? Well, the truth is that I always get the feeling that when we focus, for example, on poor areas or countries with supposedly weaker economies, where the awareness, because they have to, the awareness of the value of a piece of metal or the boards of wood is completely different. They need to be aware of the value of these materials, and the relationship established with that, seen from the outside, and the care they apply to those materials, the pride also they take. Well, it makes you rethink the essence of our materiality. How, well, as a visitor once, I visited some favelas in Brazil, and the way they showed them to us, I mean, they were impeccable inside. Everything was so well taken care of that it completely dismantles your conception of what it means to live here and to inhabit, and all of the market systems and the speculation. So all of a sudden, well, the human condition, I don't know, does not quite grasp this. And it seems like if we do not find mechanisms to go back to the essentials, then we will be falling again and again. We'll be stumbling again and again. I don't know what I'm doing here, but I mean, you're talking about things that are movements, and for me it's difficult to try and connect that with the elements that I work with that are more related to the value of this. Why is this important, or why is that important? And am I interested in then people in the future will be able to reuse this, or it doesn't matter? So we do share, I mean, you work at a different scale, and we do share these ideas of what a person can do. I will take care of these because I like it, it's cool. Yes, these things, do these things reach you, or are you in a completely different dimension? Are you at a completely different level, and for you these small things are irrelevant in your sphere, in your scope? Well, in the end, it's a change of model, and it's a societal change. And it will have to go through all of the layers, all of the levels. So anything that we can do from individuals to change the way in which we approach the matter is just as valid. So they may be dealing with something that affects the underground in all of the city of Rotterdam, But then each and every citizen can also change the way we approach the consumer culture. And this is a thing that can be done from the smallest things.
We started the conversation with the 5.7 million tons of waste, so we started like on a very macro level, and we try to land, but we're not yet on the human scale.
That, that this is what he's doing, like the human scale design, right?
Yeah, I don't know, but supongo que
I guess that the difficulty for an individual to make yourself responsible and to commit to what your life involves and what your materials involve but when we get to the dimension that you work in, it seems more difficult to understand the implications of one person's life. What is that behavior that can be relevant to those macro movements? How, when you make the effort of asking us for specific proposals or trying to be more specific, well, at your scale, you focused on the fact that you're an artist, so you show the problems, you bring the problems, but I guess that... So how do you understand that these things that are making a mess and that are escaping us, how can they be impacted? I'm sure that the audience will be appreciative of hearing what your privileged minds have to say. Well, art, at least the one I'm interested in, is characterized by being near, being close. We are talking now without seeing the work of art in front of us, but that's the characteristic of art. Art does not solve problems. I don't think it does. What art does is identify problems, but then it brings proximity. It lets us see things from up close. I wish we were talking about rubble or the intervention of an artist. So being close to the material aspect is essential in art. But what would you like to, for example, when in one of your installations, the people who can go by and see them, what type of reactions would you like to get out of them? Well, it's the beauty of the material in and of itself. Some people call it waste, rubble, rubbish, but when they see it, it looks very special because it's not geometrical, it's shapeless, it's like rounded. Construction materials, when they are piled, they have this shape as a mountain, the way they fall due to gravity. So that's the experience of the material, mainly. It's a material which is arid in the end. Most buildings that you do this installation with, they contain ceramic materials, stone, so when they've been shredded, they become arid. And so once demolished, what are the rules or attitudes or routines that we have to continue working with those arids or those aggregates? For example, now in Mallorca we have a project of age architects, and in one case there was an existing building, I'm talking about social housing, where the building was outside of the urban plan. It had to be demolished because it was not well aligned. So demolition was a must, and in that case the demolition of the existing building went through reusing 100% of the aggregates in the new building. So in a way, an installation similar to yours came up. These aggregates went then into a machine and then were used again. So it's true that mining can have certain connotations. Specifically, there are many collateral problems in metal mines, normally with environmental problems of all sorts. But I disagree that urban mining has the same negative connotations as the mining, because this mining normally happens in different places where you can not meet the labor conditions or the environmental obligations that you would be meeting in the country where the extracting company is based. But then this urban mining, if it happens in our environment, it is a local mining, and it is a mining that is using local resources of low environmental impact. So I mean to say that, well, in the end, I don't know if it's going from white to black. The matter is there's a scale of gray, and we need to see from where can we get to in that scale of gray. I don't know if you agree. In the case of Lionel, I know you work with these recuperation of components, you reclaim components. I've seen some pictures on your website, how you dismantle ceramic pavements or bricks that then you sell on your website. And now I'm switching languages. I'm talking to Lara, but with Lionel as well, so I'm not using the right language.
What I know, you're working in this equation that you have the cost of removing the component, and then you have the cost of storing the component, and it has to be cheaper than the price of the new object or the new product in order to be useful to use. Si qualcuno va entès, ells funcionen amb una qüestió.
So the way they work, when they do this selective dismantling or deconstruction, they look at the cost of dismantling, the cost of storage, and and if this is cheaper than the new product, then it works because it will have an outlet.
I believe that works very much in this line. And now what is happening is that we have an increase of the cost of the products due to the COVID or to the Ukrainian war. Aquí m'imagino que hi deu haver un munt d'arquitectes i vos està passant.
I'm sure there are many architects here. It's happening to you that the prices of steel, concrete, wood, the prices are going up. So at the point where the price of all products is higher,
it's like the new products are increasing the price. Probably reusing becomes like easier because the difference of cost now probably is more affordable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. The question of the equation. But maybe to explain how we came to this point. Rotor started in 2005 as a small group of individuals wanting to do projects together, and there was an interest for these questions of materiality, waste, and reuse. But it began as a very explorative practice. So we had, well, I wasn't there back then. I joined in 2010. But in the very beginning, it was really about understanding the circuits of the material flow. Like one of my first missions at Rotor was to visit 40 construction sites and ask the contractor about how do you manage your waste, Mr. the contractor? And every time it felt like the annoying questions. They were happy to talk about all the rest, but the waste management was but that was the beginning. We also did a lot of design projects in the first years of Rotor, working with reclaimed materials or waste of things we found on construction sites. And by doing so, we were kind of surprised that reusing materials was like a kind of underrated strategy in the building sector. We were surprised it's so absent in the regular building industry. So at an informal level or at a small scale, there is plenty of really interesting forms of reuse. But then when we go just one level higher in the formal construction sector, it somehow disappears. And so we from that point reuse became a kind of research topic for us. And one of the things we started around 2011 was a systematic exploration of all the companies selling second-hand building materials. So it was just answering a simple question: where can I find reclaimed materials on the market? Where are the dealers? And we found a lot of them around Brussels, and then in whole of Belgium, and then we looked also in France and in the Netherlands. A lot of these companies are actually active since 1 or 2 generations, so it's not a new thing. That was the result of a circular policy. It was there for a long time, but somehow no one in our architect friends were able to name just 3 reclaimed material dealers. So they were completely under the radar of, let's say, a certain maybe urban population designing buildings. And so we put a lot of efforts in documenting these players and giving them visibility through a website we called Opalis, opalis.eu, where it's just a simple guide to every company proposing reclaimed materials. And then we made also some efforts to increase the interactions between this existing sector and the projects around us. And it went quite far. We even had to write standard specifications for public tenders so that there is a window of opportunity before a demolition to allow these companies to get their materials. But at a certain point we realized that a lot of materials that we typically find in our Brussels environment were not interested or not interesting for the companies we visited. So there was a kind of a mismatch between the existing reclaimed or salvage sector and the materials we met in these let's say urban buildings, post-war urban buildings. And that was the reason why we decided at a certain point to launch a spin-off activity that we called Rotor DC, where we would actually reclaim materials, store them, sell them. So we always thought we would never become resellers ourselves, but at a certain point we decided to do this step. And now that was back in 2014. And so now, a few years later, it grew to it's quite a big activity. We have like 8,000 square meters of storage, a lot of materials. It's a team of 15 people working on this. And indeed, when we choose to go that way, somehow we had to make this activity economically feasible in the economic context of today. So when you, if you have an infinite, if you have a lot of time, you can reuse anything or almost anything. But if you want to make an economic activity out of it, and especially in the context we live in, where, in Belgium we have 21% VTA on second-hand materials. The cost of labor is quite high in comparison with the cost of materials, etc. Then you have to be smart and actually to choose for the materials that allows your activity to work. And that's how we came to this kind of equation that is it's not an absolute law, but just it's something we try to remember in order to keep a Rotor DC floating. So the work we put in dismantling something, in storing something, the money we have to invest in a material needs to come back by selling it. And that's a simple equation, but it makes a huge difference, because a lot of stuff we would like to reclaim, materials we would like to save, we are at the moment not able to do it because of this equation.
And 2 minutes.
Okay, we have 10 minutes, so now it is the time to open the floor, and we'll moderate if there's anything that is pending? We have not talked about, for example, the growth, which is essential. Well, we have a couple of minutes for that. Do you want to say anything about that? We have 10 minutes. Okay. Hello, good evening. Demolition and the way we reuse materials. To what extent memory or nostalgia is an argument that we use to revalue these materials? Do you think this is a good strategy? I'm thinking, for example, of this hydraulic pavement that was quite typical here in Barcelona. It went out of use and then it was used again because of nostalgia, a change of aesthetic paradigm, or this building where we are. At some point it stopped being used and it's been given a new function, and it should be given a more permanent role in the near future. So nostalgia and memory, are they complementary arguments to sustainability in order to give a new value to materials?
Vos queda un minut. You gotta be fast.
Yeah.
I think you too.
Fast and concise. Curro, vámonos.
Sí, Claro, es...
Okay, Curro, take us home. It's difficult to know in the field of, well, the elements we live with, we coexist with, what is the value of each aspect? Durability, memory, nostalgia, we know, but for example, today you were talking about figures and proportions, and your question led me to thinking about a service. Someone asked people, if your house were to burn down, what would you get from your house? What would you take away with you? What would you save from your house if it were on fire? And well, maybe the question is a leading question. People would grab things associated to memories. One said volcanic stone that they found somewhere. So we, yes, can guess that this is a factor, and when we use these materials that have had a previous life, we try to acknowledge this life and understanding that it is not only a mechanical matter, that material has attributes, has features that we consider important, but to what extent these, and in the context of the market, to what extent should this be considered? I wonder, just like you do. I ask myself the same question. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Thank you very much.